The morning sun cast golden rays through the tall windows of Willowbrook Palace, illuminating the breakfast room where Princess Elena sat with her eldest son, Prince Alexander. At 10 years old, Alexander possessed the same thoughtful eyes as his mother, and the determined chin that marked all members of the royal bloodline. Elena watched as her son carefully practiced writing thank-you letters to various charitable organizations, his young hand moving slowly but deliberately across the cream-colored paper. "Remember Alexander," Elena said gently. "Each letter represents real people who work hard to help others. Your words matter to them." The young prince nodded seriously, understanding that even at his age, his position carried responsibility. This was a lesson Elena had learned from her own mother, Queen Isabella, who had taught her that royalty was not about privilege, but about service. The palace buzzed with quiet activity as staff prepared for the day's events. Elena had spent months planning today's special visit to St. Mary's Children's Hospital, where Alexander would accompany her for the first time to a major public engagement. She had carefully chosen this particular visit because she knew her son's natural empathy would shine through, and the children at the hospital would benefit from meeting someone closer to their own age. Elena remembered her own first official engagement at 12 years old, feeling nervous and unsure. She had made small mistakes that day, forgetting to shake hands with one dignitary and stumbling slightly on the steps of the cathedral, but her mother had been there, offering quiet encouragement and gentle corrections. Now, as she prepared to guide Alexander through his first major public appearance, she felt the weight of continuing that tradition of patient mentorship. The morning continued with Alexander's usual lessons with his tutor, Mr. Hedyale Hensley, who had been instructing royal children for over 20 years. Today's lesson focused on the history of children's healthcare in their kingdom, preparing Alexander for intelligent conversations with the hospital staff and young patients. Elena listened from the doorway as her son asked thoughtful questions about medical advances and expressed genuine concern for children who spent long periods in hospital care. "Your Highness, Mr. Preo," Hensley said to Alexander, "what do you think would be most important to remember during today's visit?" Alexander considered the question carefully, a habit Elena had noticed developing in him over recent months. "I think remembering that the children there are just like me, except they're sick or hurt. They probably want to talk about normal things like games and books, not just their illnesses." Elena felt a surge of maternal pride at her son's mature response. She could see glimpses of the compassionate leader he might become, someone who would genuinely care for his future subjects rather than simply fulfilling ceremonial duties. The thought both thrilled and concerned her, knowing the challenges that lay ahead for any member of their family who chose to fully embrace their role in public service. As the morning progressed, Elena's personal secretary, Margaret, briefed them both on the day's schedule. The hospital visit would last 3 hours, including tours of different wards, meetings with medical staff, and most importantly, time spent with young patients and their families. Margaret had coordinated with the hospital to ensure that Alexander would meet children of various ages, some recovering from surgery, others dealing with chronic conditions, and a few who were celebrating recovery milestones. The palace's head of security, Captain Williams, reviewed safety protocols with Elena while Alexander finished his lessons. Though the hospital visit was considered low risk, every royal engagement required careful planning and security considerations. Elena appreciated how Captain Williams always explained procedures in ways that made Alexander feel safe without frightening him about potential dangers. Elena spent a few quiet minutes in her private study looking through photographs from previous hospital visits and charity events. She kept a personal album of meaningful moments from her royal duties, not for public consumption but as reminders of why their work mattered. One photograph showed her holding a baby who had just undergone successful heart surgery, while another captured her reading stories to a group of children in the hospital's library. These images reminded Elena of the real impact their presence could have on people facing difficult circumstances. A royal visit might seem like a small gesture, but she had received countless letters over the years from families describing how much these encounters had meant during challenging times. Today, she hoped Alexander would begin to understand this aspect of their responsibility. The young prince appeared in her study doorway, dressed in his carefully chosen outfit for the day, a navy blue suit with a cheerful tie featuring small sailboats. Elena had learned from her own mother that children responded well to royals who didn't look too formal or intimidating. Alexander's outfit struck the right balance between respectful formality and approachable warmth. "Mother, I've been thinking," Alexander said, settling into the chair across from Elena's desk. "What if the children ask me questions I don't know how to answer? What if someone asks about their illness and I say something wrong?" Elena recognized the nervousness in her son's voice, the same uncertainty she had felt before her first major engagements. "You know, Alexander, the most important thing is to listen carefully and respond honestly," Elena replied, moving to sit beside him. "If you don't know something, it's perfectly fine to say so. The children will appreciate your honesty more than any pretend knowledge. And remember, Dr. Terioka Patterson will be with us throughout the visit. She can help answer any medical questions." Elena went on to share some of her own early experiences, including a memorable visit to an elderly care facility where she had accidentally called one resident by the wrong name 3 times in a row. Rather than being offended, the gentleman had laughed and told her it reminded him of his own grandson's similar mistakes. The story helped Alexander understand that people generally forgave minor errors when they could see genuine care and effort. As the morning drew to a close, Elena felt confident in her son's preparation, but also aware that no amount of briefing could fully prepare someone for their first real encounter with public service. The true test would come when Alexander met the children at the hospital, when he would need to draw on his natural compassion and growing maturity to connect with young people facing serious health challenges. The royal convoy arrived at St. Mary's Children's Hospital precisely at 2 o'clock, just as Elena had planned. She had timed their arrival to coincide with the afternoon activity period, when most of the children would be alert and eager for diversion from their medical routines. Alexander sat quietly beside her in the car, his hands folded carefully in his lap, watching through the window as they approached the modern hospital building. Sarah Patterson, the hospital's chief pediatrician, greeted them at the main entrance, along with the hospital administrator and several senior staff members. Elena had worked with Dr. Cathers Patterson on multiple occasions over the past 5 years, developing a mutual respect that made their collaborations particularly effective. The doctor had a gift for explaining complex medical situations in ways that both royals and families could understand. "Your Highnesses, welcome to St. Mary's," Dr. Patterson said warmly, shaking hands first with Elena and then crouching slightly to meet Alexander at eye level. "Prince Alexander, the children are so excited to meet you. We've told them that someone very special was coming, but we didn't say who. They've been guessing all morning." Alexander smiled genuinely for the first time since leaving the palace. "What did they guess?" he asked, his natural curiosity overcoming his nervousness. Dr. Patterson laughed. "One boy insisted it must be a famous football player, while a little girl was convinced it was going to be a princess from a fairy tale. I think you'll both exceed their expectations." Their first stop was the pediatric oncology ward, where they visited with children undergoing cancer treatment. Elena had specifically requested this visit because she knew these young patients often spent weeks or months in the hospital, becoming experts at both their conditions and hospital life. She felt they could offer Alexander valuable perspectives on resilience and hope. 8-year-old Sophie was their first encounter, a bright girl with a colorful headscarf covering her head where chemotherapy had taken her hair. She was working on a puzzle when they entered her room, but immediately set it aside when introductions were made. "Are you really a prince?" she asked Alexander directly. "Because you look pretty normal to me." Elena watched her son's face light up with genuine amusement. "I am really a prince, but you're right that I'm also pretty normal. I go to school, I have to do homework, and sometimes my mother tells me to clean my room." Sophie giggled. "My mom does that too, even in here. She says hospitals aren't an excuse for leaving things messy." The conversation flowed naturally from there, with Alexander asking about Sophie's puzzle and her explaining that she was trying to complete it before her next treatment session. Without prompting, Alexander sat down and began helping her sort pieces by color, something he had learned from working on puzzles with his younger siblings at home. Elena stood back slightly, allowing them space to interact while staying close enough to offer guidance if needed. "What's it like living in a palace?" Sophie asked as they worked together. Alexander considered the question seriously. "It's very big, which is nice because I can run around a lot. But sometimes it feels a bit lonely because there aren't many other children around. That's why I like visiting places like this, where I can meet people my own age. Elena felt a flutter of concern at her son's admission about loneliness, making a mental note to discuss with her husband whether they should arrange more social opportunities for Alexander with children outside the royal circle. She also noticed how naturally her son related to Sophie, showing none of the stiffness or over-formality that sometimes affected royal interactions. Their next stop was the physical therapy room, where they met 12-year-old James, who was recovering from surgery to correct a severe spinal condition. James was working with a physical therapist on walking exercises, using parallel bars for support. Elena had briefed Alexander about different types of medical equipment they might encounter, so he wasn't surprised by the specialized apparatus. "That looks like hard work," Alexander observed, watching James take careful steps between the bars. James paused in his exercise. "It is hard, but I'm getting stronger every day. Before my surgery, I couldn't walk at all." "Now look," he demonstrated by taking several more steps, his face showing both concentration and pride in his progress. Alexander was clearly impressed by James's determination. "I play football at school, but I don't think I could be as brave as you are," he said honestly. James grinned. "I bet you could if you had to. Besides, I heard you have to give speeches and meet lots of important people. That would terrify me more than any physical therapy." This exchange led to an interesting conversation about different types of courage, with both boys sharing their respective challenges and fears. Elena watched proudly as Alexander showed genuine interest in James's recovery process, asking thoughtful questions about the surgery and rehabilitation timeline. The physical therapist later told Elena that royal visits often motivated young patients because they felt recognized and valued by someone important. The afternoon continued with visits to several other wards, each presenting different situations and teaching moments. In the cardiac unit, they met baby Emma, only 6 months old, who had recently undergone successful heart surgery. Her parents, Mark and Lisa, were taking turns staying at the hospital around the clock, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs and living on vending machine food and cafeteria meals. Elena spent considerable time talking with Emma's parents about their experience, while Alexander was fascinated by the tiny baby and all the medical equipment surrounding her crib. "She's so small," he whispered to Dr. Patterson. "Was the surgery very dangerous?" Dr. Patterson explained the procedure in age-appropriate terms, helping Alexander understand both the complexity and the hope represented by modern pediatric cardiac surgery. "Your Highness," Mark said to Elena, "having you here today means more than you might realize. When your child is this sick, it's easy to feel forgotten by the world. Knowing that you care enough to visit, to learn about what we're going through, it makes us feel less alone." Elena felt the familiar tightness in her throat that came when people shared such personal sentiments about their work. Alexander listened carefully to this conversation, and Elena could see him processing what it meant for their presence to provide comfort to worried families. This was perhaps the most important lesson of the day, understanding that royal duties weren't just ceremonial activities but genuine opportunities to offer support and encouragement to people facing difficult circumstances. As they prepared to leave the cardiac unit, Alexander asked Dr. Patterson if he could leave something for baby Emma. From his pocket, he pulled out a small toy sailboat, one of several items Elena had suggested he bring for such occasions. "This is for when she gets bigger and can play with toys," he said, placing it carefully on the windowsill near Emma's crib. Emma's parents were visibly moved by the gesture, and Elena felt a deep sense of pride in her son's thoughtfulness. These were the moments that reminded her why their role in society mattered, and why it was so important to raise her children with an understanding of their responsibility to serve others with genuine compassion. The highlight of their hospital visit came when they entered the children's recreation room, where 15 young patients had gathered for what the staff had described as a special surprise. The room buzzed with excited chatter as children of various ages, some in wheelchairs, others connected to mobile IV units, and many wearing colorful hospital gowns, waited to discover the identity of their mysterious visitors. When Elena and Alexander walked through the door, the room erupted in gasps of surprise and delight. "It's a real princess!" shouted 7-year-old Mia, who was recovering from appendix surgery. "And a real prince!" added 10-year-old David, his eyes wide with amazement. Elena felt the familiar warmth that came with these moments of genuine joy, when their presence could temporarily transform an ordinary hospital day into something magical. Alexander had been nervous about this group setting, worried about managing conversations with so many children at once. But Elena watched as his natural social instincts took over, and he began moving around the room, introducing himself to each child individually. His approach reminded her of his grandfather, the late King Frederick, who had possessed the same ability to make each person feel like the most important individual in the room. "What's your favorite subject in school?" asked 11-year-old Rachel, who was undergoing treatment for juvenile arthritis. Alexander sat down beside her wheelchair to continue their conversation at eye level, another technique Elena had taught him. "I really like history and geography," he replied. "What about you?" Rachel's face lit up. "I love art class, but I haven't been able to go to school much lately because of my treatments." This admission sparked Alexander's problem-solving instincts. "What kind of art do you like best?" he asked. When Rachel mentioned painting, Alexander looked around the recreation room and noticed an easel set up in one corner. "Would you like to show me some of your painting techniques? I'm not very good at art, but I'd love to learn from someone who's talented." Elena watched as her son spent the next 20 minutes receiving an enthusiastic art lesson from Rachel, who seemed to forget entirely about her medical condition as she demonstrated different brushstrokes and color-mixing techniques. Other children gathered around to watch and offer their own artistic advice, creating an impromptu art class that engaged everyone in the room. The natural way Alexander had redirected attention from Rachel's illness to her talents and interests impressed Elena deeply. She recognized this as an advanced social skill that many adults struggled to master: the ability to see past someone's circumstances, to appreciate their individual qualities and capabilities. It was exactly the kind of leadership quality she hoped to nurture in all her children. 9-year-old Tommy, who was waiting for kidney surgery, approached Alexander with a chess set. "Do you know how to play?" he asked hopefully. Alexander admitted that he was still learning, which prompted Tommy to offer chess lessons. Soon they had attracted several other children who wanted to participate in an impromptu chess tournament, with patients taking turns playing against Alexander and coaching him on strategy. "You're getting better," Tommy encouraged after Alexander successfully captured one of his pawns. "My dad taught me to play when I first got sick, because we had lots of time to spend together in hospitals. Now I'm teaching my little sister, and someday maybe I'll teach my own kids." Elena was struck by Tommy's matter-of-fact reference to his future family, showing how children often maintained optimism and forward-thinking even in challenging circumstances. The chess games led to discussions about other hobbies and interests, with children sharing stories about sports they played, books they loved, and dreams they harbored for their futures. Alexander listened intently to each story, asking follow-up questions and sharing some of his own experiences when appropriate. Elena noticed that he never mentioned luxurious aspects of palace life, instead focusing on universal childhood experiences, like learning to ride bicycles and struggling with mathematics homework. 13-year-old Maria, the oldest patient in the group, initially hung back from the activities, seeming skeptical about the royal visit. Elena had encountered this reaction before, particularly from older children and teenagers who sometimes viewed royal engagements as artificial or performative. She decided to approach Maria directly, respecting her apparent preference for more mature conversation. "You don't seem very impressed by meeting royalty," Elena observed gently, settling into a chair near Maria's position by the window. Maria looked surprised by the direct approach. "I guess I don't understand why meeting famous people is supposed to make being sick feel better," she replied honestly. Elena appreciated the teenager's candor and decided to match it with her own straightforward response. "You know, you're absolutely right that meeting us doesn't cure anyone's illness or solve any real problems," Elena said. "But sometimes when people are going through difficult times, it helps to know that others care about what they're experiencing. That's really what this is about, showing care and respect for what you and the other children are dealing with." Maria considered this explanation thoughtfully. "I suppose that makes more sense than pretending you're here to magically make everything better," she conceded. This led to a more substantive conversation about Maria's interests. She was passionate about environmental science and hoped to study marine biology when she recovered from her current treatment for bone cancer. Elena was impressed by Maria's knowledge and goals, and she shared information about environmental initiatives supported by the royal family. "Would you be interested in corresponding with some of our environmental advisors?" Elena asked. They're always looking for young people with fresh perspectives on conservation issues. Maria's eyes lit up with genuine interest for the first time during the visit. Meanwhile, Alexander had moved on to playing simple card games with some of the younger children, including 5-year-old Ben, who was recovering from surgery to repair a cleft palate. Ben spoke with some difficulty, but Alexander listened patiently and responded to him with the same attention he gave to everyone else. Elena watched this interaction particularly closely, knowing that Alexander sometimes became impatient with his younger siblings when they couldn't express themselves clearly. "Prince Alexander," Ben said carefully, "will you come back and visit us again?" The question caught Alexander off guard, and he looked to his mother for guidance. Elena realized this was an important teaching moment about making promises and managing expectations. She nodded slightly, encouraging him to respond thoughtfully. "I would really like to come back," Alexander said honestly, "but I can't promise exactly when, because my mother and I have to visit lots of different places. But I promise that our family cares about this hospital and all of you, and will keep supporting the doctors and nurses who take care of you." Elena was proud of his diplomatic but genuine response, which showed both compassion and appropriate caution about commitments. As their time in the recreation room drew to a close, the children presented Alexander with a handmade card they had created together earlier that morning, before knowing who their visitors would be. The card featured drawings and messages from each child, expressing gratitude for the visit and sharing some of their own stories and dreams. Reading through the card later, Elena would be moved by messages like, "Thank you for treating us like normal kids," and "It made me feel special that you remembered my name." These comments reinforced her belief that the most important aspect of their public service was treating every person they met with genuine respect and individual attention, regardless of age or circumstance. The final portion of their hospital visit took place in the pediatric intensive care unit, where they met with families facing the most serious medical situations. Elena had debated whether to include this area in Alexander's first major engagement, knowing that encountering children with life-threatening conditions would be emotionally challenging for a 10-year-old. Ultimately, she decided that understanding the full spectrum of human experience was essential for his development as a future leader. Dr. Patterson briefed them both before entering the PICU, explaining that they would meet 3 families whose children were at different stages of treatment and recovery. She emphasized that some situations might seem overwhelming, but that their presence often provided crucial emotional support to families during the most difficult periods of their lives. Their first encounter was with the Johnson family, whose 4-year-old daughter Lucy was recovering from a successful liver transplant. Lucy was awake and alert, though still weak from surgery, and her parents, Robert and Sarah, had been maintaining a bedside vigil for 2 weeks. Elena could see the exhaustion in their faces, mixed with relief that their daughter's surgery had gone well. "Lucy, we have some very special visitors who wanted to meet you," Dr. Patterson said gently. Lucy looked curiously at Elena and Alexander, not fully understanding who they were but sensing that something unusual was happening. Alexander approached her bedside carefully, having been instructed about the various medical equipment and the importance of maintaining sterility. "Hi, Lucy," Alexander said softly. "I heard you're very brave. Would you like to see something special?" From his pocket, he produced a small, colorful kaleidoscope that Elena had suggested as an appropriate gift for young children. Lucy's eyes widened with interest as Alexander showed her how to look through it and turn it to create different patterns. The simple toy provided a perfect distraction, allowing Lucy to focus on something beautiful and entertaining rather than her medical situation. Her parents watched with tears in their eyes as their daughter smiled and laughed for the first time since her surgery. "She hasn't shown this much interest in anything for weeks," Sarah whispered to Elena. "Thank you for bringing something that could capture her attention." Elena spent considerable time talking with Robert and Sarah about their experience, learning about the challenges of finding a donor organ, the complexity of pediatric transplant surgery, and their hopes for Lucy's recovery. Alexander listened to these adult conversations with remarkable maturity, beginning to understand the enormous emotional burden that serious childhood illness placed on entire families. "Your Highness," Robert said to Elena, "people sometimes don't know what to say to families going through something like this. But having you here, asking real questions about Lucy's condition and our experience, it makes us feel like what we're going through matters to someone beyond our immediate circle." This comment reinforced for Elena one of the most important aspects of royal service, the power of bearing witness to people's experiences and showing that their struggles were recognized and valued. She made sure to exchange contact information with Lucy's family, promising to follow up on her recovery progress and offer continued support through the royal family's children's health initiatives. Their next visit was with 3-year-old Marcus, who was battling a rare genetic condition that required frequent hospitalizations and ongoing medical management. Marcus's grandmother, Eleanor, served as his primary caregiver because his parents were unable to cope with the demands of his condition. Eleanor's dedication was evident in every aspect of Marcus's care, from the carefully organized medications to the cheerful decorations she had placed around his hospital room. "Marcus may not be able to respond very much," Dr. Patterson explained quietly, "but he's aware of what's happening around him, and he enjoys gentle interaction." Alexander looked uncertain about how to engage with a child who couldn't communicate in typical ways, so Elena demonstrated by sitting beside Marcus and speaking softly, while gently holding his hand. "Hello, Marcus," Elena said warmly. "I'm Elena, and this is my son Alexander. We came to visit because we heard you're a very special little boy." Marcus's eyes tracked toward Elena's voice, and she could see recognition and interest in his expression, even though he couldn't respond verbally. Alexander watched his mother's interaction carefully, then tentatively sat on the other side of Marcus's bed. "Hi, Marcus," he said, mimicking Elena's gentle tone. "I brought something that makes music. Would you like to hear it?" He produced a small music box that played a gentle lullaby when wound up. Marcus's face showed clear pleasure at the sound, and his body seemed to relax as the melody played. Eleanor was deeply moved by their visit. "Most people don't know how to act around Marcus because he's different," she told Elena. "But you're both treating him with such dignity and respect. That means everything to a grandmother who worries about how the world will treat her grandson." Elena assured Eleanor that the royal family's medical charities would continue supporting research into rare genetic conditions like Marcus's. The visit that would prove most impactful for Alexander came last, when they met 8-year-old Emma Chen and her parents David and Lynn. Emma had been in a hospital for 3 months battling leukemia, and her treatment was nearing a critical phase where doctors would determine whether her current therapy was successfully fighting the cancer. Emma was weak from chemotherapy but remarkably articulate about her experience. "I miss school and my friends," she told Alexander honestly, "but the doctors and nurses here have become like family. They make it feel less scary." Alexander was struck by Emma's matter-of-fact discussion of her serious illness and her ability to find positive aspects in a frightening situation. "What do you miss most about school?" Alexander asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Emma thought carefully. "I miss art class and reading time, but mostly I miss feeling normal. In here, everyone treats me like I'm sick first and Emma's second. It's nice when people remember that I'm still just a regular kid who likes to laugh and play games." This conversation gave Alexander insight into how medical treatment, while necessary, could make children feel defined by their illnesses rather than their personalities and interests. Elena watched him process this understanding, recognizing that it would influence how he approached similar situations throughout his life. Emma's father, David, pulled Elena aside while Alexander continued chatting with Emma about their shared interest in astronomy. "Your Highness, Emma has been asking difficult questions about whether she'll get better, and we've been struggling with how honest to be with an 8-year-old about uncertain outcomes," he said quietly. Elena listened compassionately as David described the emotional complexity of supporting a child through serious illness while managing their own fears and uncertainties. "We've found that children often handle honesty better than we expect," Elena said thoughtfully, but balanced with hope and focused on what they can control each day. "Perhaps Dr. Patterson could help you find age-appropriate ways to discuss the situation." As they prepared to leave the PICU, Alexander seemed unusually quiet and thoughtful. Elena recognized the signs of a child processing difficult emotions and new understanding about life's complexities. She made a mental note to create space for him to discuss his feelings about what they had witnessed once they returned home. Patterson walked them back toward the hospital's main entrance, expressing gratitude for their visit and its positive impact on both patients and staff. "Prince Alexander," she said, "you showed remarkable compassion and maturity today. The children and families were genuinely touched by your kindness and interest in their stories." Elena felt a deep sense of pride in her son's performance throughout the afternoon. But more importantly, she could see that the experience had genuinely affected him and expanded his understanding of the world beyond palace walls. The real test would come in how he integrated these lessons into his ongoing development as both a person and a future leader. The drive back to Willowbrook Palace was unusually quiet, with Alexander gazing thoughtfully out the window while Elena gave him space to process the afternoon's experiences. She had learned from her own mother that children needed time to absorb emotionally significant events before being asked to discuss their feelings or reactions. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but rather reflective, filled with the weight of new understanding. As they passed through the palace gates, Alexander finally spoke. "Mother, why don't we get sick like those children do?" His question was posed with genuine curiosity rather than fear. But Elena recognized the deeper implications of what he was asking about fairness, privilege, and the randomness of suffering. "That's a very important question, Alexander," Elena replied carefully. "The truth is that illness can affect anyone, regardless of their family or circumstances. We've been fortunate with our health, but that makes it even more important for us to help and support those who are facing medical challenges." She paused, choosing her words thoughtfully. "Our good fortune creates a responsibility to use our position to help others." This conversation continued as they walked through the palace corridors toward Elena's private study, where she often debriefed with her children after significant public engagements. Alexander seemed to be working through complex emotions, and Elena wanted to provide him with a safe space to express whatever he was feeling without judgment or pressure to respond in any particular way. "Some of those children were very sick, but they seemed happier than I expected," Alexander observed as they settled into comfortable chairs by the fireplace. Emma was laughing and joking even though she has cancer. "I don't understand how someone can be cheerful when something so serious is happening to them." Elena smiled at her son's perceptiveness. "You noticed something very important about human resilience," she said. "People, especially children, often find ways to experience joy and maintain hope even during difficult times. That doesn't mean they're not scared or sad sometimes, but it shows how strong the human spirit can be." This led to a longer discussion about different ways people cope with challenges, and Alexander shared his observations about each child they had met. He was particularly impressed by James's determination during physical therapy, and Sophie's ability to focus on completing her puzzle despite her medical treatments. Elena was pleased to see that he was remembering the children as individuals with distinct personalities, rather than simply as patients defined by their illnesses. "I want to do something to help them," Alexander announced suddenly. "Not just visiting, but something more practical." Elena had been hoping he would express this sentiment, recognizing it as a sign that the day's experiences had genuinely moved him toward wanting to take action rather than simply feeling sorry for people in difficult circumstances. "What kind of help were you thinking about?" Elena asked, encouraging him to develop his own ideas rather than immediately offering suggestions. Alexander considered the question seriously, displaying the same careful thought process she had observed throughout the day. "Well, Rachel loves art but can't go to school much because of her treatments. Maybe we could arrange for art supplies to be donated to the hospital. Or find art teachers who could visit and work with children who have to stay there for long periods." Elena was impressed by both the practicality and thoughtfulness of his suggestion. "That's an excellent idea," Elena said warmly. "It addresses a real need you observed, and it builds on something positive, Rachel's artistic talents, rather than focusing only on medical problems." She made a mental note to follow up with the hospital's child life specialists about implementing such a program. Alexander continued developing his ideas, suggesting that they could also organize visits from other children his age to play games and share normal childhood activities with hospital patients. Some of them seemed lonely, not just sick, he observed. Maybe having friends to talk to about regular things would help them feel more normal. Elena was struck by her son's mature understanding of the emotional and social needs of children facing medical challenges. His suggestion showed that he had moved beyond simply feeling sympathy to thinking strategically about practical solutions. This progression from emotional response to purposeful action was exactly the kind of leadership development she hoped to nurture in all her children. "Alexander, I'm very proud of how you conducted yourself today," Elena said, choosing her words carefully to reinforce the behaviors and attitudes she wanted to encourage. You treated every person we met with respect and genuine interest. You listened carefully to what they said, and you asked thoughtful questions. Most importantly, you saw each child as an individual person, not just as someone who was sick. Alexander beamed at his mother's praise, but Elena could see that he was also processing the deeper implications of the day's events. "It made me think about how lucky we are," he said quietly. "Not just because we're healthy, but because we have the opportunity to help people. Most children our age can't visit hospitals and make people feel better just by showing up." This insight demonstrated to Elena that Alexander was beginning to understand privilege not as entitlement, but as opportunity for service. It was a crucial developmental milestone for any member of their family, marking the transition from childhood innocence to mature awareness of their role in society. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Alexander's younger sister, Princess Isabella, who burst into the study full of energy and curiosity about their hospital visit. At 7 years old, Isabella possessed the same empathetic nature as her brother, but lacked his developing social sophistication. "Did you meet children who were very sick?" she asked directly. "Were they sad? Did you make them feel better?" Alexander took on the role of explaining their afternoon to Isabella, describing the children they had met and the activities they had shared. Elena listened proudly as her son emphasized the positive aspects of their encounters. Sophie's artistic puzzle solving, James's determination during physical therapy, and Emma's knowledge about astronomy, rather than dwelling on the medical challenges. "Isabella, would you like to help with some of the projects Alexander suggested?" Elena asked, recognizing an opportunity to involve her daughter in age-appropriate service activities. Isabella's enthusiasm was immediate and infectious, and soon both children were brainstorming ideas for supporting the hospital's young patients. As evening approached and the children went to prepare for dinner, Elena spent some time alone in her study, reflecting on the day's success and its implications for Alexander's ongoing development. She felt confident that the hospital visit had achieved its intended goals, exposing Alexander to the realities faced by less fortunate children, demonstrating the positive impact of royal service, and inspiring him to think beyond his own circumstances. Most importantly, Elena had observed genuine compassion and maturity in her son's interactions with every person they had met. His natural empathy, combined with careful preparation and appropriate guidance, had resulted in meaningful connections that benefited both the hospital patients and his own character development. Elena made several notes in her personal journal, documenting specific moments from the day that had shown Alexander's growing leadership qualities, and areas where she wanted to continue focusing his education and experience. She also wrote down commitments she had made to various families, ensuring that the royal family would follow through on promises of continued support. The day had confirmed Elena's belief that hands-on service experiences were far more valuable than theoretical lessons about royal responsibility. Seeing Alexander's genuine engagement with children facing serious challenges and his immediate desire to develop practical solutions to problems he had observed convinced her that this approach to preparing him for future leadership was exactly right. As she prepared to join her family for dinner, Elena felt a deep sense of satisfaction about the day's events and optimism about her son's development into the kind of leader their kingdom needed, someone who would serve with genuine compassion, practical wisdom, and unwavering commitment to the well-being of all people, regardless of their circumstances. That evening, as the royal family gathered around their dinner table, Alexander enthusiastically shared stories from the hospital visit with his father and younger siblings, already planning ways to maintain connections with the children they had met and implement the charitable initiatives they had discussed. Elena watched with pride as her son's natural leadership qualities emerged through his desire to translate the day's experiences into meaningful action for others.